Morning. Well, our theme for this morning, for this guest service, is everything under control? And Emma is going to be reflecting on that for us in the interview. But just to introduce that theme for us right now, we're going to watch a short video of Johnny Wilkinson, the former England rugby player, as he wrestled with that issue.
I got myself in such a state just with throwing a bit of paper at a bin when I was younger, because my head's swimming with these ideas of trying to understand why I feel this sense of doom. And I'm thinking, if I miss this shot, something terrible is going to happen. So I lived on that edge all the time. So it became quite normal for me to have that sense of arousal, as you said, or what that can become is that sort of lifting up the ground, that uprooting that makes you feel like you're unstable, that you haven't got that anchor, that sense of presence, that you're in survival mode. So I spent a lot of time in survival mode. And in order to combat it, I just had an intensity about what I did that was obscene. So I looked for that as we started the conversation, the perfection, the precision in everything, because I needed it, because I was already at that level. I remember I kicked for about just short of 6 hours one day. I rode my bike down to the local pitch, kicked for just sort of 6 hours. My mum drove down the car and went, I didn't even know where you were. I was like, I'm just kicking. She said, you got to come home now. I said, I can't come home. I can't come home. This isn't, I'm having fun here. It's like, I can't come home. She said, you're coming home. You need to eat. You need to do whatever. I went home and hysterically cried for about sort of 2-3 hours. I mean, marching around the garden in pieces. Got to the stage where I cried it all out to the point where I got to that feeling after you've exhausted yourself emotionally. And I suddenly felt fine, so I got my bike, rode back, went kicking again. Now, when you're saying about that intensity, I learned to live with that, but it's also that intensity with which I've turned towards being like, oh, now I'm truly interested in what I'm capable of. And in order to do that, it's no longer about saying me is a done deal. Let's see what I can do with this ball. It's saying, I've got to open the door to me, which means opening the door to all that stuff that was driving me in such an intense way, because it also drove.
We're going to continue that theme with our reading now from the Bible. And this week you'll find it actually printed helpfully in the order of service. So if you open that up, have that to hand. After our reading, I'm going to invite Jack, who's one of our elders here, and Sarah's wife, to come and interview Emma up on the stage. But before that, I'm going to invite Ricardo to come and give us our reading. Thank you so much.
Good morning. The reading is from Mark chapter 8, and it's in the service sheet. Then he, that's Jesus, called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels.
So much, Ricardo. Bear with us for 1 second as we just set up, but let me invite Emma and Sarah to join me, and we'll get underway. Emma, if you go over here.
Lovely, thank you.
Brilliant. Well, in just a moment, I'll intro Emma, but first, let me just let you know how this is going to work. So we're going to have a short time for an interview now, but we would really love to hear from you guys as well. So towards the end of the interview, we'll pause for a moment and we'll do open Q&A. And the way we do that at St. Peter's is through a platform called Slido, and you'll be able to use your phone to access that and ask any question anonymously. There we go. We've got there. There we go, Emma. You're so welcome, and thanks for joining us. Just for those that don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, folks. You can probably hear from the accent. I didn't grow up around here. I grew up in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. And in fact, one of your congregation members is good friends with my best friend, and I was chatting to her this morning, so that was really lovely. Anyway, I live in Eastbourne, and I'm married to Glenn. We have 2 children, JJ and Ruby. And we have 3 feral cats, including a new kitten who is lovely and very cute, but also has IBS. So I am very happy not to be with him this morning and not sprinkling probiotics on his food.
Lovely. Great. So when you hear a phrase like, is everything under control, how does that make you feel?
Okay, well, I really don't like that phrase, is everything under control? I don't like it at all. And I guess the reason for that would be because, well, I am a control freak. So I said that I was married to Glenn, and whenever we first got engaged to be married, we did the Star Wars personality test. And I don't know if you've done it, it's a really good indicator of how your marriage is going to go. Anyway, so we did it to work out who we'd be, and Glenn, my husband, really wanted to be the main character, the very handsome main character, Han Solo, but he came out as Princess Leia, who, you know, she's very easily dominated. And I came out as the Emperor. And the Emperor is the most controlling man in the entire galaxy. And that tells you a wee bit about me. But I guess, you know, even as a wee child, people are born a certain way, aren't you? You know, in your families, you'll have somebody who's the funny one. You'll have someone who's the, I don't know, the drama queen. You'll have whatever. And even my first day going into infant school, I remember walking in and going past all the toys and things and heading straight for the sand pit. And I spent the rest of the day, the first day there, not talking to people, but collecting up the sand, putting it back into the straight lines of the sand pit, smoothing it over, and then guarding it for the rest of the day. And in a sense, that picture of the 5-year-old or whatever me is really the way my heart is shaped. You know, I like things to be neat and tidy. I like things to be within the lines. I want to know where I stand. I want you to give me rules, and I want to be able to keep those rules by myself. And if I can do that, if I can control the world around me, I'm very, very happy. So how do I feel about, is everything under control? It's a mixed bag.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Oh, is that working?
Yeah.
When would you say that control started to become a more significant, a bigger thing for you?
Okay, so growing up in Northern Ireland, a very happy family, very close family. My family weren't Christians, but we went to church, and I think at church I kind of learned about a God, well, kind of a mixed up God. I went along to a Presbyterian church in the morning, and we heard quite a lot about God the Father, and it seemed to me he was a bit like a headmaster, and you had to keep his rules, which obviously I was quite happy doing that. But then in the evening, we went to another church with my best friend. She was Pentecostal, and there seemed to be more of an emphasis there on the Holy Spirit. And it seemed to me that God was more about feelings, and about how you felt was how you were doing with him. So I would have said I'd become a Christian when I was younger, but my view of God was very mixed up, kind of this headmaster God, and then this kind of fuzzy feeling, and I didn't really know where Jesus fitted in. Now, I'm telling you that because that will become important later, because I think even though I had come to sort of a belief in God, I didn't really understand, and that was part of where some of the issues that I felt that I dealt with came out. So, very happy family. Life went along just, you know, really normally, until I guess I hit about 13. And you know, when you're 13, lots of things in your life changed. So my grandfather died, and that was the first time we'd lost anyone in my family. And I remember talking to my mum and dad about it, and for the first time, they didn't have answers. So my dad said, yeah, he's dead, but don't worry. He's gone to the ground, and the worms will eat him, and he becomes the circle of life, and it's okay. And I remember thinking, that is not okay. That is the most far thing from okay I've ever heard in my life. So we had death, we moved house, and we were living with my granny, who was an amazing woman. She was one of my best friends on the whole planet, and I wish you could have met her. She was just, a legend. She was the sort of woman, I'm sorry I'm going off topic here, but it's so good. She loved jigsaws, right? And we used to sit around and do a jigsaw in her house, but she'd reach a point where she got fed up with it, and then she'd get the scissors out. She'd just chop the bits off and stick them in. So anyway, but we were living with her, and there wasn't very much space. We were all crowded into one room. I'd also moved schools. I went to a girls' school, and for the first time, academia wasn't really what was important there. It felt like everybody spoke a language that I didn't understand, and we were all playing some kind of social game that no one had explained the rules to of me. I did not know what it was that a girl was meant to look like and be like. You know, I didn't look, my body was changing, so it was going through puberty, but not changing like the women I saw on TV. I did not look like them, and I did not feel like them, and I didn't know, what is a woman supposed to be like? What's a grown-up supposed to be like? And it just felt like everything was out of control. I was being bullied at school as well, and then I kind of had this idea of God, but I wasn't quite sure, was it about him wanting me to do what he said, or was it about how I felt about him? And so all of this kind of added up to this feeling of mess. And you know, from what I've told you about the sort of the 5-year-old who likes the clean lines, I don't like mess. I want to be like this lectern. You see how hard it is and how the lines are really straight, and it's like that, and it's nice and clean, shiny? That's how I want to be as a person. But all of these fears and feelings, you know, what is death about? What does it mean to be a woman? Why am I being bullied at school? Why can't I speak the way other people do? What makes me valuable? What gives me meaning? What is the purpose of all of it? You know, it added up to this feeling of mess. And I felt like I wasn't shiny and clean anymore. I was like red wine that had been spilt on a white carpet. And I was full of all of these questions, and my body was changing as well, and everything was spilling out of the corners. And I guess it seemed to me that there was a word to describe my mess, and the word was fat. But it wasn't that I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh, I'd like to fit into a smaller dress size, or I want to look like a model, or it was just that I wanted to be neat and tidy. I wanted to be back in the lines again. I wanted to make sense of a world where there were so many questions. And remember, this is Northern Ireland as well, growing up. And there were, you know, it was a very troubled time. So there were lots of bombs and things going off, you know, in the town centre. And wider than that, in the world, we were learning about this new disease called AIDS. And we didn't know how you got it, or where it came from, or what the cure was, but we were just told, be careful in case you do. And so these fears, internally and externally, were just spilling out. And I felt like if I could make myself smaller, if I could get rid of my fat, then I could answer all of these questions as well. So if I could shrink my body, I could kind of shrink all of these fears. Because, you know, when you're 13 or 14, you can't control very much, but you can control your own body. And that is how I stumbled, I guess, upon anorexia. I found that there was this amazing magic thing where if I controlled what I ate, my body would change, and it was like my body was my own universe, and finally I could take back some kind of control. And instead of worrying about a million different things, I just had to worry about one thing, and it was this: could I be thinner? And yes, I could.
So you would say anorexia was offering you this one simple solution to all of that mess. Is that what you'd say? Wow.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it wasn't a conscious decision. You know, this is Northern Ireland back in the 1990s. We hadn't heard about eating disorders then. They were the sort of thing that happened to celebrities, or like Karen Carpenter. They didn't happen to ordinary families like ours. So we were really blindsided by it. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like I chose anorexia, like you pick out a scarf in the morning. It was just this thing that I kind of stumbled upon. And then I felt like it was giving me control. But actually, the more I felt in control, the more out of control I was. And in some ways, I was trying to make my body smaller. I was trying to make myself hidden. But also, the thinner I got, the more obvious I became. And it just felt like I had this iron will, and I could reduce myself to my mind. And what happened to other people, you know, getting sick and dying, wouldn't happen to me. It was different. And it was this incredible sense of power and mastery. And it was like this amazing secret, this thing that I had that gave me identity, that gave me meaning, that took away all of the other fears, and that made me feel invincible and sharp and strong and everything I wanted to be. So,
thank you for summarising that so well. I mean, that's a huge journey to have been on. What was it, when would you say you realised that anorexia wasn't actually going to save you?
well, I guess for quite a long time, we didn't really, my mum and dad and people didn't realise something was wrong, because I kind of knew that if people found out about this, they would try and take it away. So I told little lies about it. I was wearing lots of baggy clothes and so on. But it got to the point where I was really, really sick, and my mum took me to the doctor, and then sort of the wheels went in motion to try and get me help. And I got some help, but it was really, I guess, it was focused on one thing, and the one thing it was focused on was really important: physical health. Because if you lose a lot of weight, it's not just your body that shrinks, it's your brain that shrinks as well. It's what's called the whirlpool effect. So the smaller you get, the less able you are to think clearly too. So your thinking becomes very polarized, you become more obsessive and so on. So you must, if you're really low weight, you've got to get to a certain point and put on weight again before you can get help. But if that's the only thing that's dealt with, which in the 1990s, in the place where I was in Belfast, then you've got your parents to force feed you spaghetti or whatever, and you get back up to a sort of a normalish weight, but on the inside, you're not fixed at all. In fact, on the inside, you're even more messed up than you were to begin with. Because guess what? You had this feeling inside that you were messy and there was too much of you, a bit like Johnny was saying in the video, you were too intense. And you let that out, and you've kind of destroyed your family. Because for years and years, your mum and dad have been arguing about you eating, and your brother and your sister have been sidelined, and you put the whole family through hell, and you've made yourself into someone that looks really disgusting, who has this kind of sickness. And so, yeah, what do you do then? Well, you've got to try and fix it yourself, because there's nobody else to go to. So I guess I realised that anorexia wasn't really helping me, but there were lots of other things that sort of came up then. And I think this is true in mental health generally. Sometimes if someone is dealing with something like an eating disorder and you get treatment for it, if you're not dealing with the issues, the kind of the heart issues that are there, it'll come out in other ways, which is what happened for me. So then I had a period of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, it's interesting, isn't it? Because what Johnny was saying in the video about throwing things into the bin and worrying that something bad would really happen if he didn't get it into the bin, well, that was how I felt. Except for me, it was about cleanliness. I had to wash my hands in bleach, and so that became a big thing. And I became absolutely obsessed with being clean. And then I got very anxious, and I was very depressed, and then I was self-harming. And my poor mum was like, Emma, love, what is going on here? She was like, is there anything that you don't have? But really, it wasn't that I had loads and loads of different mental health issues. I just had one big, gaping heart problem, sadness, that couldn't be fixed. And it felt to me like if I could take control by making the world clean, or by making myself thinner, or later on by going to university, by doing well, I could kind of fix things myself. And so that's what I tried to do. Age 18, got into university, and I kind of went back to that sort of wobbly sort of God that I thought I knew. I thought, right, I need to start again. I need to prove myself on a different field, and this time I'm going to do it with religion. So I went to Bible college, which is where I met my husband. I was a youth leader at a children's church. I talked about the gospel. I talked about the good news of God and Jesus. And you know what? I kind of knew it, but it seemed like even though I was offering it to other people, it wasn't for me. Because either I was too bad. Who could love me? Who could love all of that kind of a mess? Who could love someone who had done what I had done? But also I was too good. I don't need Jesus or anybody else to help me. I will pull up my socks myself, and I will make myself worthwhile. So, yeah, that's where we got to. Bible college with my husband, just about to finish.
Great. And so what changed at that point? I mean, you've spoken about, your understanding of God is the kind of this headmaster and then the kind of feelings of the Spirit. But in what sense then did you meet Jesus at that point, and that was then real for you, that it hadn't been before?
So we'd finished Bible college, and Glenn, by the way, told me that he was going to be a cricketer. So he played cricket when we were at university, and he said he was going to be a professional. And I was like, I can do that. I can be a cricket wife. Or he was going to be a stand-up comedian because he did stand-up comedy. And I was like, I can be a stand-up comics wife as well. But at university, we were at Bible college. Glenn decided he wanted to be a vicar. I had not factored that in. And you know, godly women, very impressive, and particularly vicars' wives, super impressive. You know, it seemed to me that these were the most fragrant kind of women on the planet. So think of me as the 13-year-old who doesn't know what a woman's meant to look like, right? And then picture her imagining herself as a vicar's wife, all fragrant, all, come into my home, it's beautiful, I've made some cookies, why don't you have some, etc., etc. Just absolutely the very opposite of me. I just felt like I could not do that. And you know what? Glenn got a job in Eastbourne, which is where we are now, as a curate. And I was just so scared. I just thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to hold it all together. And I don't know how I'm going to let a whole church full of people see what I am like. And so the old pattern started up again. But this time, I was starving myself, but there weren't my mum and dad there to make me eat. And you know yourself, if you've had any experience with eating disorders or any addiction, if you've got someone who's a grown-up and they're in the grip of an addiction, something bigger than them, it is very, very, very hard to stop them from doing that. And lots of people tried to get us help, but I just sort of fell through the cracks. And we got to one night and we were on holiday in a wee place in Wales. And Glenn had gone to bed early. And I got a phone call from my mum. And she said, we've got some bad news, Emma. Your granny, so the jigsaw granny, the amazing one that I totally loved to bits, best friend on the planet, she's died. And the funeral's going to be in a couple of days' time. And I was dying, but she died before me. And I looked so unwell, and I felt so unwell. So, you know, sometimes you see on TV that eating disorders are they're quite beautiful and fragrant. You know, you have someone who's, they're a little bit pale, but, you know, they do look well on it. And actually, the reality is just really disgusting and grim. My hair was falling out, my nails had turned black, my internal organs were shutting down. I remember a day, you know, where I was going across to the kitchen and I collapsed on the floor and I wet myself. And then I tried to get up to go to the toilet, and it wasn't to clean myself up. It was because the scales were in there, and I wanted to see if I'd lost any weight by wetting myself on the floor. So that was the face of it, just absolute rock bottom. And yet, I still felt like I was in control. And every day, I said to Glenn, and I said to myself, I can get better anytime I want. Today's the day. We're going to turn a corner. But I never did. And that night, when Glenn had gone to bed, I was looking into the fire. And you know, sometimes there's moments in your life where it's almost like you're outside your own body. And I was thinking of my granny, and I was thinking of a marriage, and I was looking into that fire, and I was like, I keep saying I'm going to get better, and I keep saying I'm going to be in control, but it never, ever happens. And my granny, the person in the world that I love most, is dead. And I can't go across to go to her funeral, because if my mum saw me standing at the graveside, that would kill her too. I'm too weak. And I guess then I kind of cried out to God, and not the headmaster God, or the sort of the touchy-feely God, but the God that I had heard about, Jesus, God's Son. And I said, look, I want to get better. I keep saying I can, and I can't. I think I'm dying, and there's not an awful lot of me left, but if you want it, you can have it. And then I kind of waited. And it wasn't like X Factor. There was no dry ice. There was no voice from above. But I felt really calm. And I opened up the Bible, because we'd had the Bible open to pick readings from my granny's funeral. And I opened it near the back. And there's a book in there called the Book of Revelation. And it's there's a guy, John, who has visions. And the visions are about the time that's to come and about who Jesus is and his church, and yeah. Anyway, so I opened it up, and here's a description of Jesus. Now, I had always felt like, a bit like Johnny, I was too intense for everybody. I was just too much. I was too concentrated. I needed to dilute myself or make myself smaller. But here's how he's described. It says, standing in the middle of the lampshades was someone like the Son of Man. He was wearing a long robe with a gold sash across his chest. His head and his hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were like polished bronze refined in a furnace, and his voice thundered like mighty ocean waves. He held 7 stars in his right hand, and a sharp two-edged sword came from his mouth, and his face was like the sun in all of its brilliance. I always felt like there was too much for me and no one could deal with it. But when I read about this Jesus, I met someone who was much more intense than I was, someone whose intensity could blow me out of the water. And I guess it was his beauty and his majesty that drew me to him. So I had that picture of him in my head, and then I flicked on, and there's another description of Jesus. And this is in Revelation 5. It says, first of all, that he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And you know, lion's the king of the jungle, right? A lion is terrible and beautiful and roaring and strong. And all of my life I had felt like things were out of control, and I needed to take control on my own body. I needed to make sense of it by myself. But here was a lion, the Lord of the whole universe, a God who made creation, who held everything in his hands, someone who was powerful and magnificent, someone who said how the world went, someone who could make sense of it all, someone who knew, who threw those stars into space, and who created us good and created us for a purpose. And so I loved that image of God as being in charge and being beautiful and powerful. But then, and this is the last bit of it, a couple of sentences later, there's another description of Jesus the lion. It says, I saw a lamb that looked as if it had been slaughtered, standing between the throne. So on the one hand, you've got this God who made the whole world, who owns everything, and who is unlike anybody else. But then he's described as being like a broken lamb, a lamb that's been slaughtered, that's been killed. And there's no animal that's weaker than a lamb, right? A lamb that's been killed. And I guess this picture of a God who had everything, and yet, for some reason, made himself into a lamb and was killed. The very, very weakest, the very smallest, a God who comes down to be a man, and not only to be a man, but who comes to live among people and to die for them. That to me was incredible. That was amazing. Because all of my life, again, I had felt like I needed to make myself better. I knew that there was something wrong with my heart. I knew I wanted to be in control. I knew that I wanted meaning and purpose, and I just felt like I could do it by myself. But this Lord, this Jesus says, no, Emma, you don't take your own sins, your own pain, your own mess in yourself, on your own body. I have taken it on my body. I pay for it. I paid for your mess and everybody's mess on my body, and it's done. And I guess that, for me then, was the moment when things changed, when I really met the Jesus of the Bible, the lion, but also the lamb, the Lord in charge of everything and trustworthy and beautiful, but who also knows what it is to be like us, to be messy, to be broken, and who takes that on himself because he loves us, and who cleans up a mess that's bigger than even anorexia. Because, you know, before anorexia started, I had a heart that wanted to be in charge, and I still have a heart that wanted to be in charge, no matter what the cost. And it might seem like anorexia was my biggest problem. And yes, it is a big problem. And yes, it would be good to be fixed and not dying of an eating disorder. But when I saw Jesus, what I recognized was that it wasn't just an eating disorder that I was struggling with. It was just that longing to worship, the bits in me that wanted to be filled, looking for what are the answers, how to make sense of death and life and identity and the world and everything. And it was all in him.
Amazing. And I just want to remind our listeners that there'll be a chance in a moment to ask Emma any questions. But I just thought maybe help us, for those sitting here, like what does attract us so much to control? And even if it looks different for us, what is it that you think means, even now, you'd say, and really honestly to me, you say this all the time, that you've still got that, even though you've met Jesus and you've seen everything he's done for you in your life. What brings us back, do you think, to needing that?
Well, I guess it's different for everybody, isn't it? But I think we're made for relationship. We are made for a relationship that is bigger than just ourselves, and it's bigger even than being married. And I love being married, but Glenn does not complete me. And I think that we are born with hungers in us and with needs in us that want to be satisfied, and they will find a channel in something. And they'll often find channels in things that are good. It could be family or work or whatever, but they will not be satisfied unless they're satisfied in the Lord Jesus, because he made us to know and to love him. And so I think the need for control is to try and make sense of life on our own terms. It's to try and make life feel safe. It's to try and, when I look outside and I see there's a war in Iraq, or I see mess in the lives of people around me, or people being hurt, or things and relationships falling apart, I want there to be control. I want there to be an answer. I want life to be tidier, because otherwise, what is the point? What is the point? So, yeah, I think that's what's there. But I honestly think as well, it's in all of us. So right back in the Bible, at the very beginning, Garden of Eden, you've got Adam and Eve in the garden, and they're the very first people. And they had a bit of an eating disorder in some ways. Eve reaches for this apple, says, oh, this is really nice. This is the one thing God's withheld from me. I'm going to have that. And then she gives some to her husband. He doesn't say, Eve, hold on there, mate, let's not. He goes, all right. And then they gobble it up. And that begins a cycle of them being ashamed, wanting their own way instead of what God wants for them, and trying to take control. So even in the Garden of Eden, they're killing animals. They're whacking on the leopard skin to try and cover up their own stuff. They're controlling, and they're saying, the woman's saying, oh, well, the snake told me to eat that. And the man's going, well, the woman told me to eat that. And the snake's like, well, he hasn't a leg to stand on.
No way.
Anyway, yeah, so my point is that really, I think it's in our hearts. We don't want God to be Lord. We want to be Lord ourselves. And so that seeking control is just trying to make sense of things and trying to give ourselves meaning and identity, and yeah.
Thanks, Emma. You spoke earlier about this idea of it sort of, you sum it all up, all your feelings about how you felt about yourself or the world as just being messy. And that's quite a helpful sort of word image, isn't it? I can certainly relate to that. What do you think, in Fulham, perhaps we have and everywhere, we have a bit of a desire to just look a bit, to look sorted and to look fine on the outside, but be messy, actually, on the inside. What do you think that feels like? How would you summarize how that feels to look fine on the outside, but actually be messy on the inside?
Well, I think it feels like you are seen, but you're not loved. So, again, for years and years, I've been trying, and I still do it. I'd love to say to you guys, I'm all fixed. I met Jesus. Now I'm the finished article. My heart is still the same, and every day I have to keep coming to him, but he's amazing, and every day he gives me grace. But, over and over and over, I was trying to prove myself and to make myself worthwhile in front of other people. And I've never felt so desperately lonely as when you look one way, but you feel like if people really knew me, if they really knew what was inside of me, they'd turn and they'd walk away. And that was why meeting Jesus was so incredible, because Jesus is the only person who really knows us. The Bible talks to people who are hungry and angry and anxious and sad. It doesn't say, look, try and pull up your socks, because you're pretty much a good person. You can do this, just try a wee bit harder. It says, no, your hearts are wicked. But there's a Lord out there who sees you as you are, and he loves you. So that being seen and being loved, that is the best thing on the planet. Whereas being seen but not known for all the things you're trying to put together, I think that's the loneliest thing, the loneliest, saddest, yeah.
we can be fully known, mess and everything, but fully loved.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the big thing. Look, Christianity is not about looking good or whatever. It's not about good people coming together in a club to make themselves better. It's about people who are all messy. And you might not have anorexia, or you might not have the issues that I've got, but you've got a messy heart. And Jesus says every single person does. And only he can fix that heart. And the great thing about church is it's not a place where you come with your masks on to try and look good for other people. It's a place where you can stand as you really are and go, I'm a mess. Are you a mess? You're a mess too. Look at Jesus. Isn't he amazing? And that is really freeing, and that is really wonderful. And it's that relationship. You know, for years and years and years with anorexia, I remember going to some therapy stuff and people saying, you've got to think about the reasons you want to get better. And they'd say things like, if you get better, you will look healthier. You can go and have a curry. People won't be as worried about you. You know, so those are some really good things. And then they'd say, but what would you lose if you hung on to it? For me, the things I'd lose if I let go of anorexia were things that gave me identity and meaning. It was like, it makes me feel strong. She gives me an identity. She makes me feel like nothing else is important. I feel controlled. I feel like I'm invincible. And set against that, you know, looking better or going for a nice curry doesn't do anything. But if you meet a person who says, I love you, and if you're invited into a relationship with somebody who really offers you life, well, that is completely different. And so it was meeting Jesus because he was more beautiful than anorexia. And you know, in the reading we had, it's a reading where Jesus says, look, if you want to save your life, anyone who wants to save their life and come to me has to lose it. And I guess what he's talking about is that sense of dying to yourself, your own heart, your desire to be in control. It's saying, okay, God, I know I feel like this is the right way forward, but you are beautiful and you're trustworthy and you're the Lord. And the very opposite of that, in the Bible, there's another verse from Proverbs, I think it's 14, and it says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. And that was anorexia. It promised me absolutely everything, and it was going to kill me. Whereas Jesus says, follow me, and there is a cost because I've got to be your Lord. But when you follow him, then you find life in all of its fullness. And it's a more beautiful, brighter, more scary, more amazing life than you could ever have imagined.
Emma, thanks so much. I think now would be a great moment to invite any questions that we've got. And Emma, if you could stick around, we'd love to get you to answer them. So how that works is, as I said, through Slido, which you'll see on the screen says a QR code, or you can head along to slido.com, and then you need to put in that code, St. Peter's Fulham, so that you can get into the questions. Why don't you turn to the person next to you? Any reflections you've got, any questions that you think you might want to ask, you can bounce it off them, or if not, don't worry, just sit tight, but we'll be back in just a couple of minutes to answer those. Great. Okay, great. So at the top, we've got an interesting question. What would you say to someone who thinks they're doing okay and they don't need Jesus? I mean, your story was very dramatic. What would you say to someone who's like, you know, just quietly getting on with life and they're okay?
Well, I would say that someone who claims to be the God of the universe says that's not true. So it's not coming from me. It's not that I'm looking at you and saying, you know, you need to sort out your life. It is the Son of God himself, Jesus Christ, who says the problem with human nature is the problem of the human heart. And you need to look at that. And he also says that, you know, our life here on this planet is pretty short. And it goes like that. You know, my dad, we went over to see my dad at Christmas, and he died on Christmas Eve, 2 hours before we were due to come out on the plane to see him, walking up the stairs carrying the Christmas presents. Now, you can have a really lovely family life, as I do, and a really lovely existence, and that can be shattered all of a sudden by sickness, by death, by life, by everything. And you want to know what's going to happen when you die. And what is this world about? And what is the hope that you have in this world? And things might be very comfy now, but these big questions are questions that everybody has to answer. Everybody has to deal with it. And if you're comfortable and you haven't come across them yet, well, that's lovely. But Jesus says you need to get right with God and you need to know what you make of him. So even if you don't think that's you, I would say, well, pick up the Bible. Start in a gospel, a story of Jesus' life, like Mark's gospel. It's really tiny. You could read it in an afternoon. Have a wee read through that and stick up a prayer. Dear God, if you're there, please show me. If he's not there, what have you lost? Absolutely nothing. But if he is there, he might answer your prayers. But this stuff, this life and death and identity stuff, which I really do think is in everybody's heart, even if you're comfy and happy, is something we all have to address. So I think you need to do business with God.
Thank you. This is actually sort of quite a nice one to follow on from that. It says, there's flipping around, we're going to stick with this one. You talked a lot about meeting Jesus, but also that there was no dry ice X Factor moment. So how would you say, how did you meet him?
Well, I guess I met Jesus the way most people meet him, and in the way that I've just been talking about, which is I met him as I opened up this book, the Bible. So, like, I studied English literature. I love books. I think they're amazing. But this book is not like other books. This book was written by men and by God, and there's a power in it when you open up the pages. So it was as I was praying and cried out to God in front of the fire, dear God, if you're there, will you take me? There was a prayer that went up, and then I opened this, and that's when I started to meet Jesus. And I think that is generally, for most people, that's the way that we meet him.
So you're meeting him as you read his words. That's your encounter with him.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Which is actually that could be the case for anyone.
100%. 100%. Yeah. It's not. People meet Jesus in lots of different ways, but he walks off the pages of this book, and I honestly, I defy you to find anyone who is not more lovely, more magnetic, more beautiful, more humble, then you will meet him in here. So yeah, like I say, it takes an afternoon. You have nothing to lose. You may as well read through it and see if he is who he says he is.
Okay, time for one more. And are you all right to stick around afterwards for a little bit if people want to come and chat to you? Yeah, okay, thank you. You had some idea of God. I know maybe it wasn't always correct, but that you could kind of return to that, and you even had that Bible there that you've been speaking about. What about people who don't have that or a background in that, and how do they break that cycle of control that you've been speaking about? What would you say to them? How would they get the freedom that you've got?
Well, look, it is a freedom in that the power of the control is broken over me. But you know what? I wake up every morning, and that same 5-year-old, 13-year-old heart that wants to be in control, that feels anxious and sad and feels like everything is bad, is still there. And that is why knowing Jesus is so great, because it's not just that you become a Christian and then Jesus gets you across the starting line. He is there for you every single day, and every single day you come back to him, and every day you come to him with your heart and you go, I am a total mess, and I don't know how I'm going to do today. I just don't know how to get through it. Can you help me? And he does. And having a bit of a background in the Bible, in some ways that was really good for me, but in some ways it can also be a block. You can know all about the Bible and yet never have met Jesus. So it's not about what you know and or what you don't. It is really about just praying, coming before him, and then seeing, is he who he says he is? Why did he come? What does it mean to follow him? And I think that's open for everybody, and it doesn't matter whether you've got a church background or not. But equally, I would say to you, if you do have a church background, don't be fooled into thinking that you know who Jesus is and you've said no to him if you haven't actually properly done business. So if you know a lot about Jesus but you haven't really met him, open up the Bible. If you don't know anything about Jesus, open up the Bible.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Thank you very much. Shall we show our appreciation to Emma for...
huge thank you. You've been incredibly honest with us this morning. You've bared all, and I'm sure everyone here would agree with me in saying it's been incredible for us to listen to you. Emma's encouraged us to go and read a gospel, and there's 4 of those, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Start with any of those. Can I also really encourage you to buy Emma's book? It's called A New Name. It's really, really a fantastic read. You can hear more of her story there and more of this topic as well. Emma and Jack also run a podcast together, which is called Table Talk, which you can listen to on any of your podcast platforms. And again, you can hear more of the stories, and they interview other guests as well. So really worth listening to that. Are we going to hand back over to Ruth?
Sorry, can I just ask, if I'm somebody and I'm sitting in this audience today and I want to know more about Jesus, but I want some help with it, are there any courses here, or is there anything else I could?
That's coming up. You've teed up Ruth very nicely.
Right.